Hi, Will Brewer here, HVACR Application Engineer with ABB. And in this video on adaptive programming, we're going to take a look at the selection function blocks. To begin programming with the selection blocks, grab the slider at the bottom of the functional blocks section and bring it over to the right. Here you will find the min, max, limit, select value, select boolean, switch value, and switch boolean function blocks. To start, let's grab a min block. Like with other functional blocks that have this dark gray line at the bottom, you can expand this line out to get up to a maximum of 8 inputs. The min block simply compares any one of the input values and outputs the lowest value seen on the inputs. For example, we grab the analog input and give it a numerical value to compare against and say about 5. That's halfway through our range. The smaller of these two will be sent to the output. The similar block is the max. It also is expandable out to 8 inputs. And if we put the same parameters or values in for here, this will output the opposite. Whichever is the larger value will be sent to the output. Next, the limit block. Here, one input will be limited by a max value and a minimum value. Again, let's take an analog input and compare it to a max and a min value. Here we can make our range slightly different than our other two blocks. Now let's take a look at how these blocks work by downloading to the drive and running our program. So to start, our analog input is at about 8. That is larger than our numerical value of 5, so the min block is outputting the 5. For our max block, the analog input is greater than our 5, so it's the maximum number. For our limit block, you can see the analog input is just above 8, so that is the max value. If I decrease the analog input, how will this affect the outputs? Our limit block is now within the maximum and minimum value, so it is being passed out as is. The analog input value is still greater than our max, so the min and max block outputs are the same. And as we switch past the min and max blocks values, it switches. Now, to look at more of the selection blocks, let's go back into our program. Here we have the select value and the select boolean block. These two blocks take in an analog or numerical value into the selection and compare either numerical values to output a value or boolean inputs to output that boolean. Again, these blocks have a dark gray bar, so they can be dragged down to show the total number of inputs, up to a maximum of 8. These blocks work by taking in a numerical value, and that value equal to the select will pick which input value to pass through. For the select value block, the numerical value will be passed to the output. For the select boolean block, the boolean input state will be passed to the output. Now if we download to drive and take a look, I have hard set the numerical value to 1. When we run the program, we can see that 1 selects input 1 and passes a 1. On the select boolean, the select value of 1 is passing input 1, which is 0. If we change this value to 2 and download to drive and run, now 2 is being passed and in 2 is being passed to the output. Next, we have our switch value blocks. The switch value and switch boolean blocks work similar to the select blocks, but now use a boolean input or a 0 or 1, true or false state. That means if select 1 is true, it'll pass the value of in1 to the output. If it is false, it'll use the default values. As with other blocks that have the dark gray line, these can be expanded. This switch value block will now look at select 1. If true, pass the value of N1. If not true, it'll check select 2. If that value is true, it'll pass the value of N2 to the output. And if neither select 1 or 2 are true, it'll pass the default value to the output. So let's take a look at how we can do that. For the switch value, I am going to use our digital inputs to pick between select 1 and 2. I am going to use my analog inputs as the value I want to set to my input values, and I'm going to grab a numerical value and set it to a value different than what my analog inputs can be. For the switch Boolean, it can also be dragged out to many inputs. If I were to do the same with my digital inputs, I have two different selects. I want to compare what Boolean output those would be by double-clicking there. And the default value, that's tricky with only having two states. So we'll change this to a 1 as well and leave that at the 0. Okay, now download to drive and run. So currently my DI2 is off, my DI3 is on, and it is passing the analog input value to the output. On the switch Boolean, my output is true because one of my two inputs is true. This could be used for other types of state inputs if you wanted to have something other than digital inputs or a default value come in. Maybe a output of another logic block enables a switch Boolean block to pick an on-off value that's changing on its own in the drive. Now, if I change my digital inputs, you can see the switch value block has changed to select 1, even though select 2 for digital 3 is on. Again, the switch and select function blocks look at the first selection first, and if true, pass that value. If false, it checks the next value on, and so forth. Now, as I change my analog inputs, you can see the value change to the output. And if I turn off both of my inputs, the default values will be passed to the outputs. And that is a simple program using the selection function blocks. If you would like to learn more about adaptive programming, check out the videos linked in the description below. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to your local ABB representative.